Here we have an Arch Linux system. In fact, this is the exact same installation we'll be building in today's video. But isn't Arch Linux notoriously hard to install? Well, in today's video, I'm going to be guiding you through the process every step of the way. Hello and welcome back to LearnLinuxTV, the YouTube channel that's all about Linux. In today's video, it's all about Arch Linux because we'll be building our very own installation in today's video. In fact, I'm going to be showing you two methods of installing Arch Linux in this video. In the first section, we'll be going over the Archinstall method, and in the second section of this video, I'll show you the manual approach to installing Arch Linux. The Archinstall method is great for those of you that are just starting out, so if you want something quick and easy, well, that's the method that I recommend. For those of you that are more computer science-y types, the manual method is probably the best for you, which I'll show you in the last section of this video. Either way, by the end of this video, you'll have your very own Arch Linux installation. Now, if you're feeling a case of deja vu right now, yes, I did do a video about installing Arch Linux some time back. However, I like to refresh this video every now and then to keep it current, and since Arch Linux is a rolling distribution, that's especially important. Now, if you already have an Arch Linux installation, maybe one you've created from my previous video, then there's nothing new here because we're going to be going through the exact same procedure. It's just that it's going to be updated to be more compatible with the state of Arch Linux today in 2024. Now, before we get started, there's a few quick things that I need to mention. And the first is that I'm leaving it up to you to make sure that your hardware is compatible with Linux before you go to install Arch Linux. Linux is the most compatible operating system on the planet, but it's not 100%. So definitely make sure your video card, your network card, and so on are supported by Linux before you continue. And one quick way to know if your hardware is supported by Linux is to run a live CD. You could download a Debian, Ubuntu, Fedora, or any other distribution's live CD, and then try out the demo mode or live mode of that distribution before you go to install Arch Linux. You don't have to actually install any of those distros that I just mentioned, but since they offer live media, they're a great way to find out if your hardware is compatible. In addition, we'll be installing Arch Linux as the only operating system on our computer. That does mean we'll be blowing away anything that might be on your hard drive already. So make sure that you have a backup image before we get started. But hold on a minute, what do you actually need in order to get started? Well, obviously, the first thing you need is a computer. We're not going to be installing Arch Linux on a potato after all, although if you do manage to do that, then definitely send me an email or something. I need to see what that looks like. Also, you'll need a flash drive. The flash drive will be used as installation media for Arch Linux, so what we'll need is an empty flash drive or a flash drive you don't mind wiping to act as that installation media. If you don't already know how to convert an ISO image into installable media, well, I have a video already on my channel that walks you through the process, and I'll leave a card for that video right about here, somewhere on the screen. I'd also like to take a moment and mention my Ventoy video that I've uploaded sometime back on this channel. You could use Ventoy to set up a multi-boot USB flash drive, which is awesome, and you could use it to multi-boot between different distributions. It's a great way of testing out various Linux distros, so I'll leave a card for that video right about here. Anyway, I'm excited to get started. So what we'll do in the next section is check out the Archinstall method, and then in the section after that, I'm going to show you the manual approach. So let's dive in. Here on my laptop, what I'm going to do is show you the process of downloading the ISO image that we'll need for our installation. If you're new to this channel, then, well, I always use real hardware unless otherwise noted. I prefer to use real hardware over virtual machines as I feel it's a more accurate portrayal of Linux, so we will be installing Arch Linux on real hardware, and in fact, this is the exact machine right here we'll be installing Arch Linux onto. Anyway, what we're going to do is navigate to archlinux.org, and here we have the official website. Now, one thing I want to point out about the official Arch Linux website is that you should check out this latest news section every now and then. It's not common, but sometimes manual intervention is required every now and then for updates, and if that is the case, you'll find a story about that here in their blog. It's just something to check every now and then, and I recommend subscribing to it via RSS so you can keep up to date. But that's not why we came here, actually. We came here to download Arch Linux, and we could do that by clicking download at the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Once we do, we'll find a bunch of download links here. You can see there's quite a few. And essentially what you're going to do is find the location that is closest to you. That'll help make sure that there's less latency when it comes to the download. So I'll find United States down here on the map, and I'll just click on a random one. But I'm not going to download it because I've already done that. But the file you're looking for will end in a .iso extension like the one you see right here. The file name will change over time. You can see that the file name is based on the date, so this particular ISO image was created on the 1st of January. However, that's okay because they're always creating new installation media, but you'll just download whatever one is the most current, even if it's different than the one that I'm downloading right now. Once you have it downloaded, what you'll do is use it to create bootable installation media for Arch Linux by writing the ISO image to your flash drive. Again, if you don't already know how to do that, you can check the links down in the description below because I have videos already on my channel that guide you through the entire process. Anyway, once you have that done, what you'll do is boot your computer by inserting the flash drive, obviously, and accessing your computer's boot menu and selecting the flash drive as your means of installation. You'll also want to make sure that Secure Boot is disabled. You will be able to use Secure Boot. You can enable it later, but for the installation, we definitely want to make sure that we disable this. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not advocating for disabling security measures on your system, but it's just temporary. We only need to disable the Secure Boot option in our BIOS for installing Arch Linux. After your installation is finished, you can check out the documentation on the Arch Linux wiki that'll teach you exactly how to do that. When it comes to how you go about setting up Secure Boot within Arch Linux, well, I'm going to use that as an opportunity to mention the Arch Wiki. The Arch Wiki is a great place, a goldmine actually, of Linux-related resources. And sure, it's specific to Arch Linux, but the information within that wiki is, well, it's very popular, even with people that use other distributions. So if you want to set up something like Secure Boot, then I'll leave an article link down in the description below that will outline that entire process. Anyway, let's get back to our installation. So what I'm going to do right now is just reboot my machine into the Arch Linux installation media, and I'll be right back. And I'm back. What you're seeing right now is a screen recording that's being captured directly from my laptop. Like I mentioned, I use only real hardware on this channel unless I let you know otherwise. Now the resolution might look a little wonky here. It's a disagreement between the Arch Linux installer and my screen recorder, so I had to blow up the resolution a little bit here, but I will be solving this shortly right after we set up a network connection. In fact, let's take care of that right now. After all, we will need a network connection in order to download the required components for Arch Linux. If you have a network cable connected to your computer, you might already have network connectivity, and one way that we could test that is to run the command ip-addr show. That should show us our IP address, if we have one. Now, in my case, I don't. I'm using a laptop, and I don't have a cable connected. I'm going to be using Wi-Fi. I figured it's better to show you the process of using Wi-Fi just in case you need that, but if you do have an IP address, you should be good to go. In my case, if I did have one, and I had a wired connection, then it would be listed under number 2 for my wired connection, but the only thing I see here is my MAC address, so I know that I don't have an IP address, and I won't be able to access the internet, at least not right now. Now, another thing that we'll need is the interface name for our Wi-Fi adapter. In my case, it's WLAN 0, and it should be fairly obvious which one is your wireless interface, but we do need to know the name of our device, and in my case, it's WLAN 0. To find out the name of your Wi-Fi device, all you have to do is run this command, the command that I just ran, and you'll get that information. Once we have that, we could go ahead and start the process of setting up Wi-Fi. If you have no intention of using Wi-Fi, you can skip this step. To set up Wi-Fi, what we'll do is run the iwctl command, and this will activate another command prompt, a secondary command prompt that's specific to Wi-Fi. We could use this prompt to do things like scan the wireless networks that are available in our area, just get some information about our surroundings in terms of Wi-Fi, and then we could use that information to make the connection. So what we'll do is type the word station, and then we'll type the name of our Wi-Fi interface. In my case, it's WLAN 0. And then after that, get-networks. And what this should do is tell us which Wi-Fi networks are in our general vicinity. In my case, I have these 4 available right now. So what I'll do is connect to one of these networks. And to do that, I'll actually exit from this prompt, and that'll bring me back to the Arch Linux prompt, the one that we had before. And then what we'll do is use the iwctl command to actually connect to the network that we've identified as nearest, the one that we want to connect to. So I'll type iwctl -- passphrase, And then here, what you'll do is type the passphrase for your Wi-Fi network. I'll put it in double quotes, and I'll have you do the same just in case you have special characters inside your passphrase. And then after the passphrase, we'll type the word station, and then the interface name, WLAN 0 in my case, connect, and then after that, you'll type the name of the Wi-Fi network that you want to connect to. So I'll type in mine. Okay, well I didn't get any errors, so let's see what happened. What I'll do is type IP ADDR show, and let's see if we have an IP address. And check it out, we do. That's my IP address. Now what I'm going to do is switch over to SSH so I can show you the installation process with a higher resolution. But in order for me to use SSH, I have to enable it. And I figured I would show you the process as well in case you want to use SSH for your installation. The first thing we'll do is see whether or not it's active already. And to do that, we can type systemctl and then status, and then we'll check the status of SSHD, just like that. In my case, it's active and running. So there's nothing I have to do when it comes to the SSH service itself, but if for some reason it's not showing as running on your end, what you could do is type systemctl start SSHD just like that, and that'll make sure that SSH is listening for connections. After we do that, what we'll do is set a root password. By default, SSH will not allow connections to root when root doesn't have a password, so let's take care of that right now. So we'll type passwd, and then we'll type the password that we want the root account to have, and this root password is just for the installer and will not be the root password of our root account in our installation. So what I'll do is type in the password that I want this root account to have, and then I'll confirm it. And I've updated the password. So what I'll do now is switch over to another computer, and I'll use that computer to connect to this one via SSH to show you a higher resolution. It's just video editing stuff, don't worry about it. I'll be right back and the screen will look a lot better once I do. Alright, so I bet this looks a lot better, doesn't it? What I've done is I've used my HP Dev 1 to SSH into my ThinkPad X1 Carbon, you know, the machine I'm installing Arch Linux onto, so that way you guys can see it better. Now that doesn't impact us for our project today, but I figured I'd mention that in case somebody was curious. Anyway, now that we have network connectivity, what we could do is type archinstall, and what that's going to do is launch the Arch Linux installer. Now what we're going to do is go through each of these sections one by one to configure our installation. I'll start with the first option and then work my way down. And the first option here is asking us to choose our installation language. This is the installer's language, not your installed system's language. If your language is something other than the default, what you could do is press enter. You can use your up and down arrows to select something else. You can scroll through the list. It keeps going and going here. If you want to search for your language, which might be a lot easier and quicker, you could just press / and then you could type a language. I just typed English even though that's already selected. So I just wanted to show you that you can easily choose your language if it's something other than the default. Anyway, I'll press enter here on my chosen language. And that brings us back to the main installation menu. Now the next option here is asking us to choose a mirror for our installation. A mirror is where our software comes from when we install packages on our Arch Linux system. Where do those packages come from? There's all kinds of repository servers out there, but it's better to use a repository server that's close to us, so that way we avoid as much latency as we possibly can. So we definitely want to configure this. So what we'll do is press enter here. Here we're going to choose our country. So what I'll do is just search for United States by typing / and then I can go ahead and start typing my country. And then what I'll do is go down here to United States and I'll press enter. Now that should be it. We shouldn't need to do anything else here, even though we could create some additional customization. We'll leave it as simple as this, and then we'll go back to the main menu. Next, we're going to choose our locale. This is already defined for me, but we do want to make sure that this is correct. So I'll press enter, and I'll review the options that I see right here. In my case, everything here is correct. You could use the up and down arrows to select something, press enter on the thing that you want to change if you do want to make a change, but if everything is good for you, it's good for me. So we'll go back to the main menu, and then we'll go to disk configuration, the next option here. And what I'm going to do is use a best effort default partition layout. Since the archinstall method is a simpler approach, I'm going to keep this simple as well, so that's the option that I'll be choosing. I will be showing you how to partition your system with the advanced method that I'll be showing you near the end of the video, but for this section we're going to keep it simple, so I'll choose this option right here. Next, what we'll do is choose the hard drive we want to install Arch Linux onto. In my case, it's the middle one right here. It's not going to be my loopback device, certainly not. And it's definitely not going to be the flash drive that I'm using to install Arch Linux with. So the only thing that leaves in my case is this hard drive right here, the second option. Just make sure that you choose the appropriate one for you, because whichever one you choose, well, that's going to be completely wiped out. So I'll press enter on this hard drive here. And then next it's going to ask us for a file system. I recommend choosing extended 4 or ext4. I've covered Btrfs on the channel already if that's something that you want to check out, but we're going to keep it simple for this particular video, or at least this section of the video, so I'll choose extended 4. Next, it wants to know if we want a separate partition for /home, and I do, so I'll leave it at the default. I recommend you do the same. This is going to ensure that your personal data, your files basically, are in their own folder on their own partition. That's a great thing to do, especially if you want to reinstall Arch Linux without disturbing your user data, which is a common thing to do. So I'll choose yes for the default option here, and that'll take me back to the main screen. Now for the bootloader, let's just go ahead and leave this at systemd boot. If you want to choose something else, you can definitely do that, but I'm going to leave that simple here. I'm not going to install a unified kernel image, so I'm going to skip all the way down to swap, and I'll press enter on that. Now you might already know what swap is, but do you know what swap on ZRAM happens to be? Have you heard of that before? Well, it's relatively new, and it is the default option here. Basically, what swap on ZRAM allows you to do is compress things in RAM so that your RAM goes further. It's better than swap, and it's certainly better than swap files, and this is something that's changed since the last version of this video. I do recommend you leave this at its default option. I can't think of any reason why swap on ZRAM would be a bad idea, so we'll choose yes. Continuing, what we'll do is set a root password. You definitely want to make sure that this is a complicated and preferably randomly generated password. I'm going to keep it simple since this is just a demo. So I'll type in my desired root password right now. I'll do it again. And now we have set the root password. And the next thing we could do is create a user account for ourselves. I do recommend that you do this. So I'll press enter on this option here. I'm going to add a user. I'll create a user by the name of J, and I'll press enter. Next, we'll create a password for the new user. We'll confirm it. And then it'll ask us if we want super user or sudo privileges, and we do want that. So I'll press enter on yes for that option. And you could add additional users if you'd like to do that. But when you're done, you choose this option here to confirm and exit this section of the installer. Continuing, we're going to choose Profile, so I'll press enter on that. And the first thing we're going to configure is the type. What type of installation is this? Is it a server? Is it a desktop? Well, we're going to be setting up a desktop in this video. We'll have a graphical user environment and all of that, so we'll choose the first option for desktop. Next, it's going to ask us which desktop environment we want on our system. I'm going to choose GNOME. You could choose it by pressing Tab once we select it. You could also choose other desktop environments as well if you'd like more than one. So if I also wanted Cinnamon, for example, I could choose that. But I'm going to leave it on GNOME. Again, you can press Tab to select or deselect an option, and then you press enter when you're done. So for me, GNOME is good enough. Next, we're going to choose graphics driver. And for this, you're going to need to know what kind of GPU you have in your computer. Most people know what GPU is inside their computer. But basically, what it comes down to is whether or not you have Intel, AMD, or NVIDIA. By default, it's going to only install open source drivers, and some GPUs require closed source drivers in order to provide you with full video acceleration. Let's press enter on this option here. And let's go through it. So if you're on an AMD system, then you're good with open source drivers. There's nothing you have to do. So if you have an AMD GPU, you're good to go. Intel, you could choose that option here. That's also open source. And it's not until you get to NVIDIA where the proprietary versus open source thing, comes into play here. With NVIDIA, you will need the proprietary driver if you want to play games to get full, performance for your games. So if you have an NVIDIA system, I recommend that you choose that option. On my end though, this particular computer has an Intel GPU, so that's what I'll be choosing. We'll leave these at their current options here and go back to the main menu. Next, we're going to choose audio. And what you could do is choose Pipewire or Pulse Audio. I'm going to choose Pipewire. It's the newest standard for audio. I don't really think you'll notice a difference if you're not into Linux as much as I am or some other people in my audience. Just depends on how advanced you happen to be, but Pipewire is a great option, so I'll choose that. Next, what we're going to do is select which kernels we want on our system. The Linux kernel is the default, but we could also add the LTS kernel if we'd like to, and I recommend that you do. The reason why I recommend you have two kernels is because if one of them gets broken by an update or something like that, you can still boot your system from the other kernel. This way, if you do run into a problem, you have a secondary kernel that you can use to recover your system. So I recommend Linux and Linux Long-Term Support, or LTS. I press Tab to select the LTS kernel, and since I'm finished with that, I'll press Enter. Now we could choose additional packages if we wanted to add anything else to our system, but I'm not going to do that. What I'll do is skip down to the next option. We can always install packages after we set up the installation. So for the network config, what we're going to do is use Network Manager. That's the easiest option here. It's common with GNOME and KDE Plasma users. For the time zone, I'll press Enter on that. And what you could do is scroll down and find your desired time zone. Now I'm close to Detroit, semi-close anyway. So what I'll do is search for that by typing / and then I just typed in Detroit, and I'll press Enter on that option. For automatic time sync, we should leave that enabled. It's important that you have this enabled, especially if you plan on using any sync utilities. You definitely want the time of your system to be synchronized with the rest of your systems. And those should be all of the prompts that we need to answer for the installation. So what we could do right now is choose the Install option to install Arch Linux. And that's what I'm going to do. In case you're curious, what you see right here is just an output of all of the settings that we've chosen in case you want to automate this in the future. Anyway, we'll continue, and I'll be back as soon as it's finished. Well, that should be it. We've answered everything that we need to answer for the installation, and the installation itself is finished. So what I'm going to do right now is reboot the system, and let's see how it went. And take a look at this. I was able to log into my brand new Arch Linux installation, and here I have the welcome screen for GNOME 45, which is, as of the time I'm recording this video, the latest version of the GNOME desktop. So we could take this tour here if we want to. Just gives us some information about GNOME 45. I'll leave it up to you to read all of this if you want to. But it looks like everything is working just fine. Now there's one option that I recommend that you set before you start using your computer. So we'll choose Settings. Then we'll scroll down a bit and we're looking for Region and Language. Basically what you want to do is just make sure that your language has been set. If I click on mine, you can see that mine was set to English. So this is appropriate. This is what we want. We want our language to be shown right here. But the reason why I had you check this is because some GNOME apps won't even open if you don't set your region and language settings. If you have settings here, you're totally fine. But if you don't, make sure that you choose these options. Otherwise, you might run into strange issues with some GNOME apps. So just make sure that you set your options accordingly. And there you go. You now have your very own Arch Linux installation, and I hope you enjoy it. In the next section, I'm going to be installing Arch Linux again, but this time I'm going to use the manual method. So if that's what you want to do, then meet me over in that section. So let's dive in. Like I mentioned, we'll be installing Arch Linux in this section using the manual method. This is the older method before we had the Archinstall method. However, this method gives you more control over your installation. Now the first thing we'll need, just like last time, is a network connection. So we'll type IP-addr show. We need to find out if we have an IP address. And I do. As you can see, I have an IP address right here, so I'm ready to go. If you don't have an IP address on your side, you will need a network connection, so either connect a cable or connect via wireless. If you want to connect via Wi-Fi, then check the timecodes down below, because I did that in an earlier section in this video. Anyway, I'm good to go, so let's go ahead and get this started. Now what we'll need to know is the device identifier for the hard drive that we want to install Arch Linux onto. To find that out, we could type lsblk, and once we do that, we'll get a list of storage volumes attached to our computer. Now for me, SDA is going to be my flash drive, so I don't want to use that. I don't want to install Arch Linux on the flash drive. That's what I'm using to install Arch Linux in the first place. However, I have device NVMe 0N1, and that is the device that I need to use. If you have any doubts as far as which of these devices is the one that you should target, then pay attention to the size column. That should give you a close enough approximation of the size of the volume, but should match the theoretical size of the volume. So the 476.9 gigabytes I have on this device, that is pretty much a close match to what it's supposed to be, so that must be the right one. Now that we know which one we want to target, what we'll do is type fdisk. This is going to allow us to set up partitions on our system. And before anyone leaves a comment asking why I didn't use insert name of partition utility here, well, there's a bunch of them and it really doesn't matter so much. You could use whatever you want to use, but if you want to follow along with me and have a greater chance at having this succeed the first time, then I recommend that you just do it the way that I'm doing it, because I've tested this process repeatedly before recording this video. Anyway, what we want to do is target the device identifier that we've identified as our hard drive. So we'll type /dev, and then in my case, /NVMe 0N1. From this point forward, be sure to change NVMe 0N1 on your side to the appropriate device name. If your device name for your hard drive doesn't match mine, then the commands won't work. So anytime you see me type the device identifier for my hard drive, make sure you're typing in the one for your hard drive. Anyway, this is the command right here that I want to run. Before I continue, I just want to mention I did not choose a partition. So for example, this would be partition 1, this would be partition 2, and so on. I'm actually going to choose the device itself. I just wanted to make that clear in case anybody was confused. If your device identifier matches mine, just leave out the P1, P2, or whatever it is at the end, and you should be good to go. If your device identifier is something like dev SDA, then you're not going to type SDA1, SDA2, just SDA. Anyway, I'll press enter. And that brings us into the fdisk utility here, which we're going to use again to set up partitions. What I'll do right now is type P. That'll print the current partition layout that I have here on my hard drive. It's the same one I used to install Arch Linux via the Archinstall method earlier in this video. So what you're seeing right here is the partition layout from that section of the video. You might see something completely different on your end. It doesn't really matter because we are going to be wiping the hard drive, so it doesn't matter which partitions we have. What we're going to do is type G, and what that's going to do is give us an empty partition table. And if I type P again, we no longer have any partitions on our system. But that's not completely true. I didn't write the changes yet. I didn't finalize anything. If I wanted to, I could abort the process right now if I didn't want to lose anything. But what I'll do is continue. Just wanted to mention that. You still have a bit of time left if you want to back out. After we write the changes to the hard drive, then that's it. We have fully committed to installing Arch Linux at that point. Continuing, what we're going to do is create a new partition, and we could do that by pressing N, just like this. So I'll press enter. For the partition number, we're going to leave the default of 1. For the first sector, we're going to leave that at its default as well. For the last sector, what we're going to do is type +1 and then capital G, because we want to create a partition that is 1 gigabyte. We really shouldn't need more than that. I mean, if you want to be super safe, you could probably make this 2 gigabytes, but I think at that point, you're probably wasting hard drive space. Now on my end, it's telling me that partition 1 already contains a Linux file system. Remember, I mentioned earlier that we didn't wipe anything yet. Even though we've created a brand new partition table, we didn't finalize anything. Anyway, let's confirm this. Next, what we'll do is create our second partition. The first partition will be used for the boot partition, and the second will be used for EFI. So again, we'll type N for new. We'll accept the default partition number of 2. It's the second partition. It works out for me anyway. For the first sector, we'll press enter, whatever it is. We'll just leave it at its default. And for the last sector, again, we'll type +1 and then capital G to create yet another partition that is 1 GB in size. Now, if I check out the partition layout that we have so far, we have these two partitions here, but we need another one because we need something to install Linux into, and we're going to set up LVM, which is going to be a great way to do this. And because we're going to be using LVM, I'll go ahead and create a partition for that right now. So again, N for new. Partition 3 is the appropriate partition number. First sector, again, enter. Now for the last sector, we'll press enter here, which is going to ensure that the entirety of the hard drive is dedicated for our cause today. This will make sure that you have all the available space on your drive. So I'll press enter. And there we go. Next, what I'll do is type T for type. We want to work with partition number 3. We're going to set the type for that partition. And we're going to set this to 44. If you're curious, you could type capital L right here to list all the partition types, but I already know from rehearsing this video before recording it that this is the number that I want. And that's going to give us a type of Linux LVM, which is exactly what we need. Now what we're going to do is finalize our partition layout. Again, we'll just double check it, P and then enter. You should have 3 partitions just like I have here, 2 1 gig partitions, and then 1 that's the remainder of your hard drive. So far so good. So to finalize it, I'll type W, and when we enter W here, there's no going back. Once we do that, we have fully committed to installing Arch Linux because everything on your drive will be completely wiped out. I'm good to go, so I'll press enter. Sorry to interrupt myself, but I just wanted to let you know that I really enjoy making this content for you guys. I have a ton of fun. If you enjoy the content that I produce, then please consider supporting LearnLinuxTV. The thing is, producing content like this isn't cheap. So by giving back to the channel, you can help me make even more content for you guys. And to find out more about how you can support LearnLinuxTV, what you could do is go to support.learnlinux.tv, and there you'll find some of the ways that you can help support the channel. Anyway, let's get back to the video. The next step is to format some partitions. And what we'll do is format the very first partition that we created. To do that, I'll type mkfs.fat. We're going to create a fat partition, specifically a FAT32 partition. And we're going to use /dev, in my case, NVMe 0 and 1. And this time we do want to select a partition. And we're going to choose partition 1. And this is the command. So we are formatting the first partition. Next, what we'll do is format our second partition. This one we're going to format a bit differently than the previous one. So what I'll do is type mkfs, and this time we are going to create an extended 4 partition. /dev NVMe 0 and 1 p2. I want to format the second partition as extended 4. And done. That's all there is to it. Next, what we're going to do is set up the third partition, but we're not going to format it just yet. What we're going to do is encrypt it, because this partition is where all of our data is going to be stored, and especially if it's a mobile computer, we definitely want to make sure that it's encrypted. So let's encrypt partition number 3. To do that, we'll type crypt setup, and then lux in lowercase, format with a capital F, and /dev /NVMe 0 and 1 p3. In my case, we are encrypting our third partition. It's going to ask us to confirm this, and to do that, we'll type yes in capital letters. Even though we wiped out our hard drive, it's still confirming that we want to indeed encrypt that partition. So I typed yes in all caps, and I'll press enter. Next, what we're going to do is type a passphrase. This is the passphrase we'll use to unlock our computer every single time we boot it. So you definitely don't want to forget this password. I'll type in mine right now. I'll type it again. And that's it. We have encrypted our third partition. It's empty, but it is encrypted. So now if we do save something on that partition, it's going to be encrypted along with the rest of it. The next step will be to set up LVM within that encrypted partition, but we need to open the encrypted partition in order for us to start working with it. So here's how we'll do that. We'll again type crypt setup. This time we're going to open an encrypted volume instead of creating one. The type is lux, all in lowercase here. We'll target our third partition. And we're going to give it a name. I'll just call it LVM. This name is not final. This name is how we want to refer to this encrypted volume going forward, but it's just an arbitrary name. Doesn't really matter. I'll just call it LVM, simple enough, and I'll press enter. Now it's going to ask us for the passphrase for the volume, the one that you just created. And now we have successfully opened our encrypted partition. Next, what we're going to do is create a physical volume for LVM. Now, this isn't physical in the normal sense, because you could run this command against a virtual hard drive as well. It doesn't really matter. This is an LVM term. I have an entire video that covers LVM if you want to learn more about it. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about that here since I have that video in case you're interested. But what we'll do is type the pvcreate command to create a physical volume, which refers to a volume that we will be using with LVM. And we're going to target /dev/mapper/LVM. Now you remember that we named our encrypted volume LVM when we opened it. Now we are referring to it, and this is how you do that. It's saved in /dev/mapper/LVM, and anything we do with this particular volume here is going to be done against the third partition. Anyway, I'll press enter, and now the physical volume has been created. The next step is to create a volume group. To do that, we'll type bgcreate, and then we'll create volgroup 0. And what we'll do is target that same partition that we targeted last time. We're going to create that volume group within our LVM config. So I'll press enter. And now volume group volgroup 0 has been created. Next, we need to create a logical volume. You could think of a logical volume as a partition in the usual sense. It's what we're going to format and use for various purposes, much in the same way we would with any other file system. We'll type -L, and we will create a logical volume that is 30 gigabytes in size. This will be for our root file system. We are going to create this within volgroup 0. We're going to give it a name, so -n for that. That's what that allows us to do. And I'm going to call it LV_root, just like that. So our first logical volume has been created, but we're not done yet. We have another one that we'll need to create. So again, LV_create. And I'll set this to around 250 gigabytes. You can set yours to whatever you want. I'm just deciding not to choose the entirety of the hard drive because I want some unpartitioned or unclaimed space that I could use for some other purpose. But if you want to, you can set this to something else. Maybe a higher number if you have a bigger hard drive than the one that I have in this computer. We're going to create this logical volume also inside of volume group 0. We'll give it a name as well. And this one will be LV_home. This is going to be for our home partition where all of our files are going to end up. So now we have the logical volumes created. To verify everything, here's what we could do. We type bg_display, and this will display our volume groups. We have vol group 0, as you can see. And then we could run lv_display, and this will tell us which logical volumes we have within our LVM. And you should have the ones that we've created. Here I have lv_root and I have lv_home. So you need both of these in order to continue. Next, we'll type modprobe. We're going to insert a kernel module. We need dm_mod. Beyond the scope of the video for me to explain this right here. Arch Linux installation is already a complicated enough process as it is, so we'll continue. Then we'll type bgscan. We want to scan for available volume groups. And it found volume group 0, so that's a good sign so far. And then we'll type bgchange. We want to activate all volume groups. Next, what we'll do is format the logical volume that we'll be using for the root file system. Similar to how we did this before, we're going to type mkfs.ext4. And we're going to run that against /dev, volgroup 0, lv_root, just like that. Cool, now that one's done. Next, I'll press the up arrow to recall the previous command. And what we're going to do is change this over to the home logical volume. We're going to format that with extended for as well. And now that's done. So to continue, we're going to start mounting some of these partitions. So we'll type mount, then again, /dev/vol_group0, lv_root, and we're going to mount that to /mnt here on the system. So I'll press enter. So far so good. And we're going to make a new directory. We're going to create it within /mnt. Basically, we are creating a new directory that we're going to use to mount the boot partition. Next, what we'll do is mount our second partition, /dev/nvme 0 and 1 p2 in my case. And yes, I do realize that we're mounting the second partition and we have not mounted the first one yet. This is intentional. Yes, we are mounting the second one right now. So we'll just go ahead and go along with it. Anyway, where we're going to mount this to is /mnt/boot, the directory that we've just created. At this point, we have the logical volume for the root file system mounted, and we also have the boot partition mounted. Next, what we'll do is mount the home partition, but before we do that, we need a directory for that as well. So let's create it. What we'll do is create /mnt/home. So I'll press enter. And with that done, what we could do is type the word mount. We're going to mount the logical volume for home. So /dev vol_group0 lv_home. And we will mount that to /mnt/home, just like that. So far so good. Next, what we'll do is install some of the required packages for Arch Linux. This might take a while for some of you out there that have internet connections that aren't all that great. So if that's you, you might want to grab a coffee. But what we'll do is type the word packstrap -i and then /mnt, and then we'll type base, just like that. We'll go ahead and press enter. And I'll let this finish. I'll be right back as soon as it's done. And in my case, it's already done. That's pretty quick. Next, what we'll do is generate the fstab file. This is actually required for mounting partitions at boot time, so you definitely want to make sure that you don't miss this step. To do it, we'll type gen fstab -U and then -p /mnt 2 greater than signs. And then we'll type /mnt/etc, and then fstab, just like that. There it is. And let's see what that looks like. Why not? Now this is a good status check for those of you that are following along with me, because you should have 3 partitions listed right here. If you don't, you might have missed a step earlier, and if that's the case, you'll want to go back and make sure that you find out what you've missed. Your output should look almost exactly the same as mine. The UUIDs will be completely different, so you don't want to worry about that. And the device identifier will be different, of course. But other than that, you should have 3 partitions just like I do right here. Now what we're going to do is log in to our in-progress Arch Linux installation. We don't want to reboot yet. It's not done enough to where it's self-sustainable, but it is done enough to where we could use a arch-chroot environment to access the partition we're installing Arch Linux onto and run some commands against it. To do that, I'll type arch-chroot, just like that, and we'll run that against /mnt. You'll notice that the command prompt changed here. We don't have colorized output in my case anymore. But now the command prompt that we're using is a command prompt from our in-progress installation. So just keep in mind that any commands that you run right here will be executed against your installation. Now a lot of these steps don't need to be done in any order, but I'm following a logical order, and one thing we can knock out real quick is setting the root password. Now you might have done this already when you enabled SSH if that's something that you did do, but this is the root password for the root user inside your installation, not inside your installation environment. So you definitely want to make sure that this user has a great password. It's very important. So pass WD and then enter. I've typed in my password. I'll type it in again. And there we go. Since we created a root user password, we may as well create a user for ourselves as well. To do that, we'll type user add, then -m. We'll also add -g. We're going to add our user to the users group. This will be their primary group. The secondary group that I'll add my user to is the wheel group. This will give us access to sudo, which we'll probably need at some point. And then finally, we'll create a name for our user account. I'll name mine Jay, just like you see here. So far, so good. Next, we'll create a password for the user, and we'll do that with the passwd command as well, but this time we're going to target the user that we've just created. If you don't target a username, then it assumes you want to change root's password, but if you do target a user, well, it's going to let you change the password for that user. Type it in again, and there we go. That's all set. Next up, we need to install some additional packages. What we'll do is type pacman. That's the package manager we'll be working with when it comes to Arch Linux. I have an entire video that covers pacman. I'll leave a card for that video right about here. If you want to learn more about the package manager within Arch Linux, that's a great video to watch if I do say so myself. Anyway, pacman -S, and we're going to type a number of packages here. You could just copy these from the official blog post for this video if you want to, but I'm going to go ahead and type them out right now. We'll first install base devil. I always end up needing this, so that's why I'm having you guys install it. At some point it'll come in handy, I'm sure. DOSFS tools. We'll install the GRUB boot manager, the EFI boot manager package. It's abbreviated. I'm going to install GNOME, GNOME tweaks. That'll give us the GNOME desktop, LVM2. We need this package for our system to understand how to access LVM setups, so we need to make sure we add that. We'll add mtools, Nano, or any other text editor if Nano isn't your cup of tea. It doesn't really matter. We just need a text editor. We'll use it eventually. We also need Network Manager. OpenSSH is optional. If you want to access your system via SSH, you'll need this. If not, then go ahead and omit it. OS Prober, just in case you set up a dual boot later. We'll also add sudo, so that way we could have administrative access to our system as well. Anyway, I'll press enter, and let's get these installed. Press enter here for the default. This is just asking us which of these packages we want to install for the GNOME desktop. I'll just install this particular collection. We'll press enter for this as well. Enter again. And enter yet again. Now these packages are now installing, so I'll let this finish and then I'll be right back. Alright, so now that's done. And then next, if you decided to install OpenSSH, we may as well enable it. That way it'll start when our system starts. If you want to do that, this is completely optional. You type systemctl and then enable, and we're going to enable SSHD. Next up, we are missing one very critical component of our Arch Linux installation. We are literally missing Linux. Yes, we are missing Linux itself. We have no Linux in this installation at all. But thankfully, that's very easy to rectify. What we'll do is type pacman-S, and then we'll type the word Linux. We want to install Linux. I'm not kidding. We're going to literally install Linux. Since Linux is a kernel, not an operating system, Arch Linux is the closest equivalent to an operating system, we're going to install the Linux kernel by installing the Linux package. In addition to that, we're going to install Linux headers. Quite a few people will need this anyway, and it doesn't take up much space, so we may as well install it. This will give us the Linux kernel, but I'm not done yet. The next two packages are completely optional, but I'm going to give you these package names just in case you want to install these as well. Linux LTS is the long-term supported version of the Linux kernel. So we are installing a second kernel, and the reason why I'm doing that is because I always want a backup kernel in case my primary one doesn't boot for whatever reason. It's rare, but if there's an issue with the Linux kernel in Arch Linux where it won't boot on your system, then you'll be able to boot from the other kernel. It's just a failsafe. But maybe you'll actually prefer the LTS kernel. I'll leave that up to you. Since we installed the headers for the Linux kernel, we'll do the same with the LTS kernel. So on my end, I'm going to install these four packages. We'll press enter to accept the default here. Enter again. And there we go. Now this package is completely optional, but I do recommend that you install it. The Linux firmware package contains firmware for the Linux kernel. You might need something like this for proprietary hardware. I'm not going to get into all of that. It's just something that you might need. Many of you will need it. You may as well install it. Again, I'll leave that up to you, but I'm going to do it. So I'll press enter. Enter again. And that's all set. Now the next thing I'm going to have you guys do is set up a driver for your video card. Since each of you will have a different video card, it's important that we understand which one we do have so we know what to install. In order to find out, we can get some clues by typing lspci. And what this command does, if you didn't already know, is list your PCI devices. You'll probably have a lot of output here, but essentially what you're looking for is something that'll give you a clue as far as which kind of GPU you have. So if I scroll up here, we have VGA, that's a good clue. In my case, I have an Intel GPU, so now I know which one I have. You might have AMD or NVIDIA or something like that, but depending on which one you do have, that'll determine which package you need to install. Now if you have an Intel or AMD GPU, then what you'll need to do is install the Mesa package. And since I have an Intel GPU, that's what I'll install. In my case, it's already installed. It shows reinstalling right there, so there's actually nothing that I need to do. I'm just going to cancel this. I don't need to reinstall it. But we do need to make sure that we have it if we have an Intel or AMD system when it comes to the GPU. So what this tells me is I have what I need on my end. Now, if you're one of those that have an NVIDIA GPU, then you'll probably need the proprietary driver in order to take full advantage of hardware acceleration, basically to be able to play PC games. So for NVIDIA users, here's what you'll do. Pacman-S, we're going to install the NVIDIA package, and also NVIDIA-utils, just like that. Now, if you've installed the LTS kernel, then you'll also install the NVIDIA LTS package as well, because the NVIDIA package, the first one, is for the Linux kernel, and NVIDIA LTS is for the Linux LTS kernel. Now, I'm not going to install these on my end because I don't even have this GPU, but I definitely wanted to give you these commands in case you do have an NVIDIA GPU. Now, for those of you that have an Intel GPU, we're not quite done yet. What we'll need to do is install a package to enable hardware decoding. So what you'll need to know is how new your chipset is. For example, if you have a Broadwell or a newer chipset, here's the package you'll install. Intel Media Driver. So again, if you have Broadwell or newer, this is the package that you'll need to enable hardware decoding if you have an Intel GPU. Now, for those of you that have an AMD GPU, you'll need to install a different package for hardware decoding. So for you guys, what you'll do is install libva-mesa-driver. And in case you're curious, NVIDIA already has what you need inside the driver, so that's why we're not doing anything for video decoding in regard to NVIDIA. All right, with that done, let's go ahead and continue. Just make sure you've installed all the packages that you need for your GPU before you continue. Next, what we'll do is edit a special config file. So we'll type nano/etc, then mkinit-cpio.conf, just like that. And what we'll do is scroll down a bit here. You need to find the hooks line, and here it is, right here. So what we'll do is add a few things to this right here. We'll go in between block and file systems, and we're going to add the word encrypt, and we'll also add LVM2. Basically, we want to make sure we have encrypt and LVM2 right here within our hooks, because if we don't, well, the kernel won't know how to deal with an encrypted file system or LVM. Well, it kind of does, kind of doesn't, long story. Basically, you need those verbs here within this line for everything to work as we intend it to. Just make sure you've added everything exactly as I have it here. Anyway, we'll save the file, and then we'll exit out. Next up, what we're going to do is generate a few things for our Linux kernel, or Linux kernels if you have two. What we'll do is type mkinit-cpio-p, and then Linux. This is for those of you that installed the Linux kernel. Now notice how encrypt and LVM2 are listed right there. You want to make sure that you see those in the output like we see right here. Now, if you're like me and you installed the LTS kernel, then we need to run that command again, but this time we're going to run it against the LTS kernel itself. Basically, what you'll do is run this command for every kernel that you have installed. Now this will take another moment to finish. And now that's done. All right, let's go ahead and continue with a few remaining steps here. What we'll do right now is set the locale information for our installation here. We're going to edit this file, /etc/locale.gen. And what you're going to do here is look for your locale. I will have a link in the description down below if yours is something different than mine and you need to figure out what it is. In my case, it's going to be English US. So what I'll do is just keep scrolling down until I see EN. And in my case, I'm looking for this one right here, English US UTF-8. I'm going to uncomment that, and then I'll save the file. Now once you've uncommented your locale, we can continue to generate the locale itself. And we'll do that by typing locale gen. So locale-gen. And now that's done. Next up, we're going to use the nano text editor yet again. And we're going to edit /etc/default/grub. We're going to find this line right here, grub command line Linux default. I like to add it before quiet, just a personal preference here. We're going to add crypt device. And we're going to set that to /dev NVMe 0 and 1 P3 in my case. So for this, you'll add the device identifier that represents the third partition, your LVM partition, and then colon, and then the name of the volume group, which we called vol group 0. Looks like I have an extra space here. Let's get rid of that. And now we have the completed line. Just make sure that you have everything here exactly as you need it. For example, make sure the device identifier here matches your actual hard drive device identifier. If anything is wrong here, it's not going to boot. So you definitely want to pay special attention to this right here. Anyway, let's save the file. And then we'll exit out. And what we'll do next is set up the EFI partition. If you'll remember, there was a partition that we didn't set up. We skipped it earlier. Well, we're going to take care of that partition right now. We'll make a directory where we're going to mount that partition. We're going to create a new directory under /boot/EFI. And now we can actually mount the very first partition that we created. We've ignored it completely up until now, but now it's time to give it some attention. So what we'll do is mount it. In my case, it's /dev/NVMe 0 and 1, and then it's partition number 1. And what we'll do is mount that under the directory that we've just created. Next, what we'll do is install the GRUB bootloader that's going to allow us to boot our system in the first place. To do that, we'll type grub-install --target. We are going to set that equal to x86_64, then -EFI. EFI is in lowercase this time. --bootloader, -ID, grub_uefi, --recheck. So just take a moment and make sure that you've entered the command exactly as I have it here, and we'll press enter. And it's installed. No error reported. We should be good to go. Now we're almost done, but we have a few things left that we'll need to do. We're going to copy a file into our boot directory, and that's user share locale. And you can grab this command from the blog post that'll be linked down below if you need it. And we're going to save that underneath /boot/grub locale en.mo, just like that. Then we'll generate a config file for the GRUB bootloader. And the output file, we'll save that at /boot/grub/grub.cfg. Well, so far so good. Now the next thing we're going to do is enable GDM. This is going to give us a login screen when we first boot our system. To do that, we'll type systemctl, we'll type enable, and what we'll do is enable GDM, the GNOME Display Manager. Now I'd also like network support as well. We did install Network Manager, so let's enable that next. So again, systemctl, enable, and then Network Manager with a capital N and a capital M. So now we have that enabled. And actually, we are almost completely finished. In fact, we're going to exit the arch-chroot environment right now. We're going to unmount everything that we've mounted so far. You can ignore any errors that you see here, totally fine. And then what we're going to do is reboot. And if all goes well, what we'll have when we do reboot is a brand new Arch Linux installation. Let's see what happens. And take a look at that. Here we have a brand new Arch Linux installation, and I have a desktop environment. I was able to log into GNOME, so on my end, it's working out just fine. We get a little tour right here that we can use to check out what's new in this version of GNOME. Nothing that's really going to stand out here, but it's welcome all the same, pun intended. And we're good. Now, before you get started with your Arch Linux install and get to using it, there's a few things that I recommend that you do. First of all, just make sure you have access to Wi-Fi if that's something that you do want access to. If you see Wi-Fi networks here, you're good to go. Another thing we want to do is click here where it shows a gear icon to go to settings. And what we'll do is scroll down a bit. We're going to look for region and language. And what we want to do is make sure that we fix this right here. If it says unspecified, then this is going to create some problems for us. Some applications won't even open. So that's why I'm having you check that right now. So what we'll do is click on it, and we'll click on our language here. Then we'll click this button right here to select that. And it's telling us that this won't take effect until we log out. I recommend that you do that, and then you can log right back in. From that point on, we shouldn't have the issue where some apps don't start because we set the locale. And there you go. You now have yourself a brand new Arch Linux installation, and I hope you enjoy it. And also, if you've enjoyed this video, then please click the like button to let YouTube know that you enjoyed this content. That might result in more Linux content here on YouTube, and I would really appreciate that. Now, before I go, I just want to mention one more thing. If you want to support Linux learning, then please consider becoming a patron or channel member for LearnLinuxTV to support the channel. It's not expected, but it's always appreciated. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next video.